Good day, listeners. This is Chris Miller, and you're listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. It is a cool day here finally in Dallas. We're getting some fall weather. As you know, I like to give my little weather report. And I have someone here. I love when I get the opportunity to bring someone back to the show. And Jennifer Roig-Francoli, she has been on the show way back, Jennifer. I don't know if you remember, but probably 9 episodes in. And I actually re-listened to my interview with her, and I could see that I was so excited to talk to her. My voice was so animated because she has such great concepts. And if you're a follower of me, CJ Miller, you know that I love taking concepts from different disciplines and merging them into making art. And Jennifer, she is a prize-winning violinist. She is a certified Alexander Technique teacher and the creator of the Art of Freedom method for conscious living and masterful artistry. Her unique and inspiring online coaching programs empower musicians of all kinds to break through personal blockages to healing, joy, and musical success. And one of the reasons we're having Jennifer back today is she is releasing a book today. Her new book, Make Great Music with Ease: The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. And Jennifer, good morning. How are you?
Oh, hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm doing great.
I know
It's
you're just bubbling with excitement,
Yeah,
which
I
is,
am just thrilled that my book is finally out there. I mean, it's people talk about having a book like birthing a baby, but I tell you, this is a lot. It's been a lot longer and a lot harder.
it is a lot. I agree with you. It is a lot of work, but the benefit is, don't you feel like it's so cemented in your mind, like your practice and how you teach and who you are now?
Well, actually, yes, the process of writing the book was Yeah, it was very interesting because I put these ideas that I have into words all the time as I'm teaching, but having to put them down on paper, knowing it would be out there and I can't take it back once it's in print, right?
Right.
Does kind of make you think, or at least it did for me, made me think even more carefully about what I mean and what I'm trying to say. And it was a very, very interesting and helpful process for me to go through for my own practice.
It is. I mean, you talk about the importance of words, right? And using the correct word. You really do have to hone it down, right? When you put it in writing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I've been writing my entire life, but I've never actually thought of myself as a writer until towards the end of writing this book. I finally realized I think I need to own the fact that I'm a writer at this point. And I don't even play the violin much anymore. I write much more than I play the violin.
Oh,
So,
I love that. You know, I think that's so important for everybody listening to this, is owning who you are, right? Owning that you're a musician, owning that you're a writer. I like to say that everybody should own that they're an artist.
yes,
But
agree.
I
And
just got,
everyone's a musician, and everyone's got a song inside of them, even if it comes out, with kind of out of tune or whatever. Everybody's a musician.
I think that's true. I do think it's true. I wanted to share with our listeners that you were interviewed. Oh gosh, I think it was almost 2 years ago, Jennifer. But the title is Violinist Jennifer Roig-Francoli's Technique Removes Bad Habits Through Mind, Body, Self-Awareness. And I re-listened to it yesterday. I like to see what we talked about. And I was so excited because you talk about the Alexander technique and you talk about your own process. And I'm going to let you share that with the listeners. But you were the first one to introduce to me the whole concept that our body is part of our creative process.
Oh, yes. Well, it's interesting that you say that because as I write about in my book, for a long time, I was confused about including the body in what I do. If I could have been a violinist just as a mind without my body, I would have done that. I had this real big mind body split. And it started, when I was a kid, and that ended up causing a lot of problems because I wasn't including my body in my awareness. And I even had wrong ideas about it that were kind of twisted. And this is the Spiritual Artist podcast. And I think some of my ideas and some of the mind-body split came from wrong ideas about my spirituality, actually, where
really?
there were some ideas that are out there in different religions that actually have you deny the body. I mean, I think immediately of Christians who flagellated themselves. I'm sure there are still people who do that, but it was like a medieval thing. That was a very popular thing to do in those circles. But somehow in my psyche, I had this unconscious belief that the mind was more important than the body. And the mind was worth more. Being an intellectual, thoughtful, all smart and good in school, I thought those were more valuable than what I was doing physically with my body. And now, many years later, I know that's completely wrong because we are one undivided self. And as soon as you try to split off different parts of you and separate those different aspects, you're going to end up with some problems. And a lot of people end up thinking in ways that even create physical pain, and not the kind where you're flagellating yourself. It's actually internal
just as
injury,
bad, probably
diseases.
just as bad, but more subtle, right?
Worse, yeah, I think it's kind of, well, I don't know if it's worse or not, but it's like you're doing it. A lot of people do that to themselves, and they're not even aware that they're causing injury and disease and all kinds of physical problems in themselves just by how they're thinking.
I love that you brought that up, because I think it's such a strong message in a lot of organized religions, is there is this separation. And I am coming, and you were the start of it, and I've been doing more and more talking with other people about the importance of the body. And I called a friend of mine last week. She's a Unitarian minister, and she said, and I started telling her how excited I was, because I found another technique similar to yours in the acting discipline that talks about the body. And I was so excited. And she goes, wow, Chris, you're always right there on the edge. She said, everybody's talking about the body now. How does the body come into play? And I would say you were before the edge, Jennifer, because you've been practicing this. How long have you been teaching this method?
Oh, well, I've been teaching it since 2007 and studying it since 2003. But, a lot of these ideas, they're not mine. They're not new, right? But like Alexander was born in 1869. He was somebody who was way ahead of his time. And so I can't exactly take credit for that.
But, the concept, I guess I should share with the listeners that didn't hear the first interview, is that in order for you're dealing with musicians, a lot of what they do is they put stiffness into their body. Perhaps they tighten their shoulder to hold a violin, or they grit their teeth, and all of that can come out in the music, right? And also in their experience.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think something that's overlooked a lot, and I really stress it in my book, is that what's happening in the body is just reflecting what's going on mentally and emotionally. And so if I like your example, because 99% of violinists will lift up the violin and squeeze it there between the shoulder, neck, and chin. And it's just way more effort, way more tension than is necessary. But the problem is that most people try to solve that problem by saying, okay, now I just need to relax my shoulder, or I need to let go of the tension in my neck. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, anybody who's ever tried to relax one part of their body that's chronically tense knows that it keeps happening. Like the tension, the habit will keep coming back. And the reason is that you're not actually getting to the source of the problem, which is how you're thinking about what you're doing. So that example that you gave of violinists squeezing the violin on their shoulders is perfect, because I think, and this is my speculation, but I think it's pretty on track, because I've been a violinist my whole life and I worked with hundreds of violinists. I believe that we develop a fear from the very beginning when we're first starting to play the instrument, no matter what age we are. I was 4. And most people, like if they're children, their parents are saying, be careful now, don't drop that. We paid a lot of money for that. Or we have to give that back to the shop now. We're just renting it. It's not ours. Or adults who actually have paid the money. They want to take good care of this beautiful instrument. Of course you don't want to drop it. And it's an awkward, weird place to put a violin up on a shoulder. So there's this underlying, even if a person's really excited and happy, there can be just a little bit of fear and anxiety about not wanting to drop this lovely thing. But as soon as you introduce an element of fear or anxiety, even if it's just a little bit, that's translated into the body as excess tension. And most of us are not aware of subtle anxieties, subtle fears, or we know they're there. We don't want to look at them. We don't want to deal with them. And so the point I'm making over and over again in my book is that we actually need to know this and do something about it, but it's actually really easy. What's the opposite of fear? Well,
Freedom.
Love, right?
Love. Yes, love.
Love, yeah. So, or confidence, but I really think that love is, I mean, it's so cliche, love is the answer, but it really is because, and it's also, I believe, the unifying word that all of us can relate to. Not everybody can relate to the word God or spirit or source or, all of these words that may have more religious connotations. It's really hard for a lot of people to accept those words. But I haven't met a person yet who doesn't want love and doesn't believe in love or some kind of it anyway. So, of course, then there's a whole process that I teach for helping people to embody that. So it's not just a concept, right? How can you actually think it, feel it, live it in your whole body, emotions, mind, soul, spirit, and then take it into your actions? I think if we could do that, we could save the world. We could solve all the wars and
I do believe that. I do believe it. It's what I call it is self-consciousness, awareness, self-awareness.
Absolutely.
So I love this. I can see just talking to you how you have actually shifted since I talked to you before.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
I do. I see that you aren't shying away from spirituality or the word, or you're embracing it, which is quite lovely, actually. I think it's fascinating.
You just gave me a lot of goosebumps, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your saying that, because I needed to do a lot of work myself to get over my fear of exposing my spirituality in front of anybody.
Right. I hear you. Yeah.
And now I mean, I still have some of that depending on who I'm with, but it's so important. I think it is the most essential thing, and it's the key to being yourself. I wrote about something that my dad always used to tell me, and I was actually very, very shy as a kid, believe it or not. I was really afraid to talk to people, and I would kind of stay in the background and I was more of a listener and observer. And so I found it difficult to communicate verbally. And whenever I had problems of any kind, I remember my dad telling me, just be yourself, Jennifer. And I was like, yeah, that sounds really good, but how do you do that? So it kind of became a little like a Zen koan for me throughout my life. Just be yourself. Like, what the heck? How do I do that? So it's kind of a lifelong, it's been a lifelong journey, continues to be, to know myself and be myself and then express myself. And then understanding through the work that I do, specifically Primal Alexander, which is touch-free, like no contact Alexander technique developed by my partner, Mio Morales. Through that practice, I've come to realize more and more viscerally, really essentially, that we don't have to do anything to be ourselves. Like, who else are you going to be? It's like you're already yourself. And then, of course, we put on all these masks and protective layers and build up the fears and anxieties and what I call the doubt monsters. We just need to notice those and then, let go and get in touch with what we really want. And that's love, I think.
I
At least
do.
it is for me.
Just, when I went back to listening to the earlier podcast, there were a couple of things you said that I just wrote down, and it's just what you just said there. In that earlier conversation, you said we're learning how to use the mind to get the mind out of its way.
Yeah.
And it's what you just said there. We don't have. I try to teach this to my art students. I don't have to teach them to be original. They are already original.
I love that.
It's just they have to let those layers of all the stuff they were told they had to be. They have to discard them, and then underneath it will naturally bubble up. They come to class. I just got back from a spiritual artist retreat, my first that I did.
Yeah, how did that go?
Oh my gosh, I got to tell you an exercise that we did with the body, but it was a wonderful retreat, and they all come wanting me to show them who they are, and all I can do is release who they aren't. And there's so many shoulds. We should use a certain type of writing instrument. We should use a brush instead of our hands. We should use our hands instead of our brush. We should use oils instead of watercolor. We should, there's all these rules. And the truth of the matter is, you don't have to do any of it. You could just sit there and rub your hands on the paper and make marks. It's that simple. So it was a wonderful retreat, and it came out of, a lot of this body. So I want to tell you this activity that we did and see what you think.
I just want to say, I love what you just said.
Oh, thank you.
To all of that. And so much the same for musicians. Just have to.
Yeah. I'm getting those bad habits out, right? The things that are holding them up. And we should share with the listeners, there is a book originally that I read is it called The Alexander Technique? Is that the book?
There's a book. There are lots of books. Maybe the one I mentioned was by F.M. Alexander.
Yes, yeah.
It was called The Use of the Self.
Oh, which, by the way, when you said that earlier about getting the self, I have to find myself, and I love that term. Just sitting down and going, the use of myself, the use of the self. Most people don't ever think about their own use of themselves.
That's right.
I still love that term.
The whole self. Yeah, it's pretty brilliant. He was very much a genius, for sure.
He was. So one of the things we did at this activity was really interesting is I'm really, I've been focused on the body probably since I interviewed you. And I've been collecting data. And I found this wonderful theater teacher, Paul Baker in Dallas, that I've learned some of his methodologies. I'm starting to read and kind of incorporate it into my training. But what we did is I had them all stand in a line, and I played music, and they had to do a body movement, and the first person in the line would do something, and they had to follow them and do the same motion.
Oh, wow.
So the whole line's going, and then when they walked the room, there was a circle. We had a table with some paper on it and paper and inks, and they had to draw something. And then when they drew something real quick, just a quick motion, quick free motion, they go to the back of the line. The next person moves up, and then they do something, whatever it can be. We had and they could invent whatever body movement they wanted. And let me tell you, it was quite interesting what they, quite challenging, because some of them would pick motions that were silly and make fun of you. And some of the participants were resistant. And I said to them, notice where you're feeling resistance. Notice where you're feeling. One guy said, I'm not going to do a ballerina. And I said, notice that about yourself. Isn't it interesting? You have resistance to your female side, right? Yeah. And it's true. And we just have to watch who we are. And at the end, of course, we had this wonderful collage of work because people added and subtracted. The idea being that our body can lead us to more mobility, more like it can almost shut down the mind in this case. And then they freely expressed on the paper.
Yes. Oh, that must have been so much fun for everybody.
It was.
I can see it.
It was the last project I did. I was rather scared to do it because I thought it was a little out there. It's a little out there. They loved it. They loved it.
Yeah, when you get people moving, like the creative juices can flow more easily.
And this actor, Paul Baker, this director from Dallas, he has a whole book on that, and he talks about that technique. He does, because theater, see, we expect that in theater. We expect theater students to move their body, but then we go and turn to an artist or a musician, and we expect them to be stiff.
It's true. Or at least, if not stiff as a musician, there are prescribed, like you were saying about artists, we have so many shoulds. And especially, I'm a classical musician, but you know, it doesn't matter. I work with anybody, right? All skill levels, all instruments, all genres. I don't really care. It's because I'm working with a person, not a musician, right? but yeah, there's so many shoulds. There are so many ways that we think we should be holding our instrument, ways we think the arm should be moving, what we think we should be doing with the wrist, the fingers. And we put ourselves into this, it's like a straitjacket almost, that then people feel like if they're doing something really different, it's not okay, even if it sounds amazing. So people put this cap on what's possible. I'm all for being open to all possibility. And I think being open to all possibility and being curious to explore and experiment and find out what's happening right now is the key to getting in touch with our creative spirit, our inspiration, and our uniqueness. And yeah, it's not even necessarily so much about the personality being unique. It's just that something magical happens through you when you get out of the way and you let go of all the prescriptions and the rules. And it's not to say that anything goes to be to obviously, if I'm a violinist and I want to create a nice sound, there are limits on what that instrument can do. I can't put 20 pounds onto with the bow onto the string and expect it to make a nice sound, right? So there's always a limitation on the violin as an instrument and also on the human being as an instrument. I mean, obviously, I cannot sing like a baritone because my voice is not made for that. But within the limitations of there's only one Jennifer, me, Roig-Francoli. I'm the only one that has this particular body, this particular brain with this particular wiring in neurology.
Right.
And so if I just get anything extra out of the way, this is really a minimalist process. This is a subtractive technique. I think art is a subtractive technique. And you said it yourself a moment ago, where you get all that excess stuff out of the way. Well, what's left? You. And then if you just allow the ideas to come through you, they'll be shaped by the container that you are. And the result has to be unique. It can't not be. Even if you're like classical violinists, we play this classical musicians. There's some new music out there, of course, but we play old music a lot, and we play the same stuff over and over and over and over and over again. I happen to love Bach. Bach is my favorite. And I will play the same piece over and over and over again, and it's never the same twice. Because I get out of the way and something new comes through every time. So it's always an expression of surprise and spontaneity, and it only works if I know that I don't know what is going to come through, but I'm open to discovering what's going to happen. Yeah. And that has to be about the mind and the body and the whole self, because if I'm not including the whole self, then habits creep in and block that free transmission of an idea.
They do, and we go down a lane of templates or copying or imitation, right?
Yeah.
I think what frustrates me in the art world is when I see an artist doing a very distinct style, very, very tight, and then doing it over and over, the same style over and over again. And I'm like, no, 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 break free from that. You know, every painting should be the step to the next one. And it always should be a little different. And, you know, like you said, every performance is different. Every
Yes.
performance. And that's what makes it so engaging. And years a while back, I interviewed my husband who teaches the Meisner technique, and it's about being present as an actor, and really you just get out of the way, be present with the other person, and see where it goes.
That's
and
exactly.
and that every performance, even though you might be doing the same show night after night after night, that's what's so wonderful about live performances. You know, if you go see a movie, it's the same exact thing every time. You go play The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews is doing the same exact thing every time. But if you go see a production, a live production, or you hear a symphony production of the music, it's always different.
Yeah.
Every day. And that's the power of presence, the power of the moment, right? Just the magic of it, you know.
Yeah. And you used a word earlier on that is a key word. It's a key to everything. Conscious awareness.
Conscious words.
Right. Consciousness or awareness. I guess it's two words. You can put them together. But basically,
They're
awareness.
good. They're good.
And it's
Yeah.
all about that. And it's all about just being here now, curious. I think curiosity is a big, big key to opening up what's possible. And yeah, not knowing.
I love that word. You know, I'm gonna be vulnerable, admit that I have challenges with the word curious. And
Hmm.
that's all the more reason why I need to go toward it, right? If I have issues with it, then I need to go toward it and see why. Because curiosity, you're right. You just have to be curious about what can happen, you
Yeah.
know?
And
And
it's something really simple. You know, it's interesting that you have a resistance to it. Um, I had a resistance to curiosity for many, many years. For spiritual reasons that I think I had wrong.
yeah.
I'm not going to go into the details about that, but I do know that when I started taking Alexander technique lessons from a teacher that I really connected with, suddenly it's like, how do I even describe that? It's like that resistance, there was like a dam that I had put on my, it's like it wasn't okay to be curious about things. I was supposed to just, maybe there's that word supposed to,
Oh
right?
yeah.
I was supposed to be a certain way, do things a certain way, and be content with how things were. And if I wasn't content and I wanted to explore and look further, there was something wrong with me. Now, that may sound like totally messed up, and I think in a way it was, but I didn't know it at the time. Then when I took Alexander lessons for the first time, and my first lessons were more traditional in the sense that it was using touch. My teacher touched. It's not manipulative. It's very gentle. It's actually what we call non-doing hands, so that the hands are just in contact and there's a communication that happens that way kinesthetically through touch. But there's no doing or manipulation. So in that situation, with that style of teaching, which I still appreciate, I don't do it myself for other reasons. But what happened was that I felt safe to start letting go of some of the layers that were holding me in, kind of that straitjacket phenomenon, right?
Right.
I didn't even know I was in, but I knew I wasn't happy, and my neck hurt. That's why I went to Alexander technique to begin with. So little by little, he started, teaching me that it was safe to let go, that it was safe to not work so hard, not try so hard, and that it was safe to get curious. And as soon as I started to relax and let go a little bit, oh my gosh, it was like taking the lid off of this question machine. It's like I came to every lesson with a long list of questions because I was feeling amazing and I didn't understand any of it. So I wanted to understand, I wanted to know what the heck is going on here. I ended up not really getting the answers in those lessons. So I read all of Alexander's books, got them from the library, loved them. I don't necessarily recommend them because they're old Edwardian language and some of it's questionable. But except for that one that I always recommend, the use of the self. But anyway, it's like I was so curious and I became insatiable to understand more about what was happening to me to allow, because I started feeling so good. I started to feel happy again. I started to fall in love with life again. I remember speaking about the body, I remember being in my kitchen at home, reaching up to get something from the shelf and marveling at this object that I was able to use to go get a glass. And somehow it has to do also with witnessing ourselves and becoming kind of detaching. I call it healthy detachment. Detachment, a lot of people don't like that word. I love that word in the sense that I mean, which is healthy, where you're actually able to observe yourself almost as if you were, it's almost like your higher self, in a sense, is able to watch all of you. And you realize you're an instrument of something much greater than this little personality, this mind, body, self. There's something so much bigger. And we can tap into that when we become a witness of it. So, my teacher didn't tell me any of this. Right? He didn't talk much at all. So I would go home and like, what's going on here? This makes so much sense. And I love it. And it feels great. And it was, helping me put together the dots on my personal spiritual life that, things that had not made any sense, like denying the body, for example. Suddenly I realized how to include the body in a really spiritual, positive way. And it felt great. And there's nothing wrong with feeling good.
I love
that. That was just the beginning of my Alexander adventure. That was in 2003, already 20 years ago. My goodness.
I love the word witness. It's a word I haven't heard before. I've heard like be the watcher. That's Eckhart Tolle. But I went on the retreat. One of the things that I really wanted my students to do is to watch themselves, like you just said, to witness themselves. And so on day one, we got a journal, and in the whole retreat, I would stop all the time and we would record something in the journal. And if a thought crossed your mind, you put it in the journal. And so it's like you were just saying, I call it my greater self, and then I call it little Chris. So I'll be like, why does little Chris get threatened that someone's using the same color as he is? Like, why am I getting threatened? And so the greater Chris can sit there and go, oh, that's silly. And so it's learning to operate from that, what you'd call witness, or the greater Chris, and trust that all the things will fall in line, right? It all comes out the way it needs to come out. And that curiosity, just being curious, like, isn't it interesting that Chris is so possessive of his colors? Or why does he have those fears of lack? Why does he think there's not enough for everyone? And you can get deeper and deeper with it. And then I would encourage them to write it down. And I'm a big believer of journaling, only because it's not when you journal that you get the greatest benefit. It's 2 weeks later when you pick it up and you read it and you go, I'm doing the same thing today. Like you read it and you realize that you are just a pattern. This is one of, I love this term, by the way. Paul Baker uses, he says, look for your patterns. What are your patterns of living? And so you go, well, I have a pattern of competitiveness or insecurity, of jealousy. If I see someone doing really well, there's a pattern of getting what? Why? I should look at it like, oh my gosh, look how good they did. I can do that well. But my little Chris would have a pattern of, you could, and right, Jennifer, you would tell me, Jennifer, I could see, I could feel the tightening in my shoulders, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because your body tells you, right?
Yeah. And my work is all about noticing how your thoughts are influencing what's going on in your body, your emotions, and to learn that you actually do have the potential for conscious, these are Alexander's words, conscious, constructive control. All three, the conscious, constructive control, those are Alexander's words. And control is a tricky one, but in the sense that we're talking about here, the way I see it is once we become aware of what's actually happening within us right now, we also have the freedom to choose our next thought. And so when you think the next thought in a way that's constructive, and that's at the heart of Primal Alexander, the method that I teach, we do something called constructive thinking. And it's a very specific way of using the mind, as you said before, you quoted me, to get the mind out of the way. We use the mind, we use thoughts to get the mind, the overthinking, the unhelpful thinking, the habitual pattern of thinking. We use the constructive thinking to get that mind out of the way. And it is a very specific way of thinking. And yes, the contents of our thoughts are very important. It's really important to think positive, loving, helpful thoughts, and not to think the other ones like, I'm not good enough, I'll never have enough, all those, what I call doubt monsters.
Right.
Very important to pay attention to the content of our thoughts, but it's pretty rare in my experience. I have not found a lot of people outside of the Alexander world, and even within the Alexander technique world, I think we're missing that sometimes, that it's how we think that makes all the difference. It's even more important than the content. It's how you are thinking. Are you thinking with an intensity that is very goal-oriented, ambitious, like I want to get that, I want to figure that out, I want to analyze that? And I have just 3 pictures in my book, and one of them is Rodin's sculpture of the thinker. And
great.
If you know that sculpture, I'm sure you do, Chris. It's the one where it's
exactly.
bronze, dark and curled up and constricted and thick. And that's a way of thinking. And that's the way most of us have been taught to concentrate. I could talk about that for weeks. About
I know. I love this. I love what you're saying, because even when you think about a sculpture, it's wrong. It should be Rodin's not thinking, because he's so tight.
Yes. Well, he's way overthinking. And I have another image to contrast with that. It's a white statue of the Buddha. And it's just like non-thinking. It's such light, just a whisper of a thought. There's no excess doing. It's just pure, clear thinking. It's like once all the clutter's out of the way, you can allow the thoughts to come through you. And it's like one thought is very powerful if it's clear. Yeah. And so this is actually at the heart of what I teach, is how to think in this way that we call constructive thinking. And it has to do with the awareness, it's the neurology. We're doing something special with the brain to actually let go of the clutter, the mental chatter, all of that, and to allow the inspired thinking that's clear and simple to come through, and then to allow the body to act on that. Yeah. And that's how graceful movements happen. That's how great art, whether it's with a paintbrush or a pen or a bow, or a baton for a conductor, right? It doesn't matter what I call secondary instrument is. When this instrument, the self, the primary instrument, is working the way it's designed and intended to work, things just happen. And they happen the way they're meant to. You said it before too.
Right.
You allow things to happen the way that they're naturally going to unfold, and you just allow and accept and watch it.
And what you realize is we spend our lives thinking we have to force life to happen. And what we realize is this greater power, this spirit, this divine intelligence has a plan already in mind for us. It's already built into our creative DNA. And if we just let go, it expresses, and we'll be okay. We will be okay. You know, we don't have to worry about tomorrow. Isn't that in the Bible or something? You know, we will stay where we are. You've just said so many things. I keep putting little mental notes and stuff you're talking about. This always happens with you, but I
Sorry, I'm
love.
always like digressing all over the
I
place.
know. No, I
Like,
know, because so many things you said, you know, you talk about Buddha, and of course, I think there's okay with detachment. Buddhism is all about detachment, not. I don't think they mean not caring.
no, at
That's
least not in the sense that we usually think.
right.
Yeah.
Detachment. You just step back a little bit, right?
I actually like to talk about the caring issue with my students. I talk about being carefree instead of careful and or careless. You don't want to be careful, you don't want to be careless, you want to be carefree. But in that, with that healthy detachment that is allowing things to work, because otherwise you would have to be careful.
Right. Oh, I love that. That's a wonderful soundbite for you. I love that, because it's the spectrum of pushing too hard, pushing too little. We want to be right in the middle. I want to go back to something you said, because I think it's something that I'd love the listeners to focus on. And I want to see if you agree with me. You know, when we talk about our thoughts, I was thinking, I was thinking we can monitor whether or not they are good, or you don't like the word good, but in love, by feeling our body, right? Like if I think, why is that person using orange? If I just am aware of my body, I know that that's not a constructive thought. Now, how would you say that?
I think that's partially
Mm-hmm.
true, and I'd have to think about this a lot more too. It's a great thing that you're bringing up. And the reason I'm hesitating, I don't think it's that black and white, because you can, again, it's the manner of the thinking that comes into play and not so much the content. For example, I'm really jealous of that person. I feel, and I can feel really tight when I think it.
Yeah.
Because actually what's happening is I'm having a reaction to the thought. Whereas if I just notice the thought, I'm really jealous of that person, and it's true, but I'm not reacting to it, I don't get tight. It just passes through. It's like I'm allowing the thought, because we have all kinds of crazy thoughts come through, right?
Every minute, right?
Yeah. And rather than resisting them or rejecting them or fighting them or denying them, if we can just notice the thought and not react to it, then it can just pass. And so what? Big deal. Like, it's okay that you're jealous. Right? Not, I don't mean you. I mean, just this is the example, right?
Right.
It's okay to be jealous. It's okay to be angry. It's okay. Like, all the emotions are okay. The problem is we believe that some of them are not, and then we react against them internally. And when you react, you get tight, and then it becomes a problem. And you think that the problem is the fact that you're angry or that you're jealous or whatever, when actually the problem is that you're reacting to the thought.
The problem is the judgment of the thought.
Exactly.
Oh, I love what you just said. It's delicious. I mean, I love that. Because you said, yeah. How do we? I love that. You know, because people sit there and go, well, so what you're saying is there are no thoughts that are bad or good. It's just okay. And that was actually that there was a little bit of that in your first interview at the end, and I was like, what is she talking about? And now I understand. I understand what you're saying. So it's really great, you know.
And I'll have to say, the old me would be totally rejecting what I'm saying right now. Because of course there are good thoughts, and of course there are, and I can almost hear like some thoughts in the airwaves, right? People might be listening saying, that's not true.
Do you know, it's funny. I love it, because I just did a solo show here in Dallas about 6 weeks ago, and it was called Emotional Roller Coaster. And each painting had a strong emotion, and I wanted people to walk through the show and literally feel happy, sad, and realize that they're just transitory. And you've just given me some clarity even on what I wanted to say to them, which is to not judge it, to just feel it. Just feel it. You know, oh, this painting feels this way. Oh, this painting feels this way. Oh, this painting. Look at that. Isn't it interesting? Because I think where we're in trouble today on this planet is so many people are judging it and then fighting and, you know, in having it come out in bad ways. And it's just say, and just, if we could just step back a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I have to just add that that goes the same for so-called good thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We react in the opposite way to good thoughts, like, oh, I love that. Isn't that amazing? And we want to hold on to that. And we create a whole bunch of tension by doing that too.
Yeah. You
And
just have to say,
exactly, just allow the feeling. And as artists, this is absolutely an essential skill to have. This is what I'm teaching my musicians, because it's the same for visual artists and actors. Like,
it is.
you want to create something that is going to touch someone, to move them, and you want them to have an experience with you. It's a shared experience. And yet, to be able to share it, you need to find a way to let it through you, which means you can't be reacting against it or wanting to hold on to it. Instead, and with music, this is really evident, because the music comes in immediately, it's over. Like, you hear one note and then it's gone. It's not like a piece of art that you hang on the wall and you can keep looking at it. Music is so ephemeral. It comes and it's gone. And so when I'm playing a piece of music, the idea comes, and I need to allow it through me. Like, it's in my mind first, and it comes through my body, and then I'm allowing my body to create it with the instrument. And it might be really angry music, or it could be just passionate music. It can be full of heavy emotion. And I need to be able to feel it all, but to let it through, so that in the next split second, the emotion has already changed in the music. So I need to be able to keep allowing that process to flow constantly without getting in the way of it. And then the listener also needs to be open to allowing those emotions to move them. I say needs to, they don't need to, right? Some people are open more than others, but potentially the audience member can be moved by the music because they're open to allowing the sound vibrations to come in and actually literally affect the body. The different sound waves can move the body literally, if the body is not rigid and rejecting, oh, I don't like Beethoven. They're not going to be moved because they're resisting it.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I love this. You always pull me ahead, like I'm going to more, there's always more, right?
I know. Sorry, I keep going.
No. I love it, because this is a concept that I can focus on, and it's just where I'm at. I want to share a word that you taught me. You were the first one that introduced it to me, is ease. You talked about ease, and I used it on the retreat, and I had the students be aware of where they felt ease and where they felt resistance. But because they're two different things, but what you're talking about, I almost feel like with feeling that music and letting it come through you, is just, there's an ease to it, right? Just,
yes. Well, you're accessing, and actually, I think since we talked, I'm using the word easing more than ease.
Oh, are you?
Because the ease is more of a thing. It's a wonderful thing, but the reality is actually living and moving. So having a verb of easing is where we are, and it's always evolving, right?
No, it is always evolving, and you're just as much a linguist as I am. You're like, you keep tightening it, right? It's just,
well, honestly, this is not from me. Again, this is from Primal Alexander. Mio Morales is the person who's kind of developed this specific form of touch-free. Actually, it can be with touch too, but we don't usually use touch. This form of Alexander technique. And so he's really brilliant and has been working on these ideas for more than 50 years. He's like way beyond.
Did he say use the word easing instead of ease?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
oh, okay.
And so this idea of constructive thinking in the specific way that I'm sharing about comes from a question that he's come up with. So actually everybody listening right now can just experiment with this question. If you get curious about yourself for a moment, bring your attention back to yourself, you can ask yourself, where else in my body do I seem to be easing a bit? So it's just a little variation on what we talked about last time.
Yeah.
It's just a little more evolved into easing as a process, as a flow, as a happening that changes constantly. And you can watch that flow. You can watch that opening and that easing move through you. And you can also, the more you do this, and it's a very, specific structured practice that I teach, the more you practice what we call awareness etudes or studies, the more sensitive you become to noticing that energetic easing or flow happening inside of you. And you also start to notice when you're interfering, by thinking in a certain way, like, oh, I'm not good enough, then the flow stops, right? or it's interfered with a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so once you can notice the difference between the easing and the interfering, then you have the ability, that conscious constructive control, to think a next thought, which is constructive, that allows the flowing to happen again. And when you can do that, first I teach my students how to do that without doing anything else, right? It's challenging. It's very subtle. And when they get better at it, then they can start bringing it to their musical instruments and start slowly integrating it into the actual creative process. Or, everything in this book is applicable to any art form. And it's just if anyone who's not a musician wants to read it, I think it would be very valuable. You just substitute painter for art, for right. Violinist or whatever. It really doesn't matter. It's the same process.
Yeah, I think that's what I love is all the disciplines you can borrow from them. And I think that Paul Baker says that someone in any discipline, when they learn to take from other disciplines and what they've learned and transfer it over. So the book itself, you have, I did notice something here. I want to bring it up before we end this, is you said you have the Art of Freedom method. And now, is that your own?
Yes.
Do you want to explain that, how that is a little bit for the listener?
Yes. I called it the Art of Freedom method because that means that I get to be free to do whatever I want with it.
That's great.
But there is a bit of a structure to it. It has the Art of Freedom method has 5 life pillars. I call them life pillars. The 5 pillars are 1, purpose, 2, mind, 3, body, 4, spirit, and 5, artistry. There was a short period where I said music, and I thought, no, it's not about music. This is about art. It's about artistry. And it's about bringing inspired creativity into your everyday life so that when I lift up the book, that can be an art. I mean, it's like the Japanese tea ceremony, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what the activity is. When you're bringing your conscious awareness to it in a certain way, it becomes like an art of living. And so I call it the Art of Freedom method for conscious living and masterful artistry, because I also do go in depth into lots of specifics of how to bring yourself to your music and your art. So it's all about starting with your why, your purpose. And if you don't know what your purpose is, it really doesn't matter. Just get curious about what it might be. So, as long as you're curious and open to learning and experimenting and discovering something fresh and new, that in itself can be a purpose. Right? So we have purpose, and then mind, body, spirit go together. It's the whole self. But like in the book, the book is in 3 parts. Part 1 is all about these 5 life pillars and how they interact with the challenges that musicians face in today's world, mental challenges, emotional challenges, physical challenges, tendinitis, carpal tunnel, all those kinds of things, pain, tension. So part 1 is really about the problems that musicians come up against in themselves and in the world. And then part 2 is my journey as a violinist, as a spiritual person, and how I found the Alexander technique, how that totally opened up and changed my life. And then when I met Mio, then I learned Primal Alexander and started not using my hands for lots of reasons. And I love not using my hands. I teach exclusively online.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Doing that since 2018, by the way, way before the pandemic. And I just love it because it's really totally clear that it's all about the thinking and it's not about anybody's hands manipulating or doing anything. So I love teaching online. So that part 2 is my whole process there. A lot of personal stories. There are a lot of stories throughout the whole book, lots of client stories, success stories, struggles, and my dark night of the soul is in there. And then part 3 is the practical part. It's like, how do you do these mysterious things called constructive thinking and awareness etudes? And I go into detail and into depth into the Alexander technique principles and the process of Primal Alexander. I guess I'm wanting to encourage your listeners that whatever the art form, doesn't matter, even a beginner who's just starting out today can make really great art when certain conditions are there. And it has to do with Alexander called it the mental attitude. You have to start with the mental attitude, is what he said.
Yeah. When I listened to the old podcast, I brought up something in that podcast that I was working on, and I've realized that I don't do it anymore. It was a bad habit that I had. I think I talked about being critical, and I realized after listening to the tape, I'm like, oh, I'm not that way anymore. And, because, it's like stand back and curious and just, watch it and just, oh, isn't it curious that I do that? And I don't.
Oh, congratulations.
So you can shift and change and grow and
it doesn't have to be hard. It's actually, it's all about ease. It really is less effort. Less is more in this sense. Like just paying attention and observing changes things without having to do anything else.
Wow. Well, I'll tell the listeners to go out and get a copy of the book and look for you online, and also that you do consulting and you're available, so they can use you for that. So,
absolutely. Did we mention the title of the book yet?
Yeah, I think I said at the beginning, but Make Great Music with Ease: The Secret to Smarter Practice, Confident Performance, and Living a Happier Life. So I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to tell the listeners to follow this. If you haven't already, go up there and hit that follow button so you follow me on YouTube and you can see more interviews like this. Who knows? We'll be bringing Jennifer back and we'll be talking about some of these things that she pushed me into a new way of thinking. So now I have to gestate on it, and we'll come back and bring you back. So
I'll see you in a couple of years, Chris.
Yeah. It's funny. And I don't know if you remember in that last interview, I told you have a book in you.
No, oh my goodness.
I did.
I do remember that. And I think that was before I was doing it.
No, it was. You said, oh, no, I'm working on this. I'm doing a performance. I said, no, I hear.
I was making my CD at that time.
Exactly. Right? And I said, no, and I said, my inspiration is telling me you got a book coming. And now here you are. So
you're right.
Well,
Chris, all right. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you and share these ideas with everyone here.
It was. Thank you for coming back and seeing me. All right. Talk to you soon. Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.